Imagine looking dead center into a camera lens, right? And you just boldly tell thousands of strangers, like, I no longer care about the social repercussions.
Oh, that is such a huge defiant statement.
Right, exactly. So you're probably wondering, what grave sin did this woman commit to brace herself for all that massive societal backlash?
Right.
Well, she publicly refused to split the dinner bill.
Yeah, that's it. That's the big rebellion.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are decoding a wildly popular and honestly highly controversial movement in modern dating, and we're using just one single viral snapshot as our map today.
Yeah, it's from a social media coaching account known as Ladies Advice.
Right, and the block of hashtags attached to this one post tells this really sweeping story about the shifting expectations of modern romance. And if you're listening, you've probably felt these shifts yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And the visual of the post is just incredibly stark. It's a blonde woman, and she has this serious, almost defiant expression. And then that one bold sentence is just stamped right across the screen.
But the real story, like the thing we really need to look at, is in the metrics and the metadata.
Yes, the numbers are wild. We are looking at over 7,000 likes, 1,500 comments, and 1,400 saves.
Wait, saves? Why are saves the important part there?
Because a save indicates that someone saw this 10-second clip and decided, I need to archive this, like as a reference point for my own life.
Oh, wow.
And this is not just a fleeting opinion. It is a deliberate manifesto that is clearly resonating deeply with a very vast audience.
Okay, so our mission today is to essentially act as translators for this whole hashtag soup attached to the video.
Exactly.
And to be clear, we aren't taking sides here. We're just going to meticulously unpack these tags. Things like level up season and hypergamy and masculine energy.
Right, we want to map out exactly what this creator is rebelling against.
Yeah.
And, more importantly, the highly structured alternative she is offering to her followers.
So let's just jump right in. Let's start with the rebellion itself. The text says she no longer cares about the social repercussions. But, repercussions for what, exactly?
Well, the answer is right there in the first cluster of hashtags she uses. She tags things like 50-50 relationships, 50-50, 50-50 relationship, and 50-50 dating.
Oh, I see. So she's putting those right next to her declaration of defiance.
Exactly. She is publicly and very loudly rejecting the modern egalitarian ideal.
Yeah.
She's just totally abandoning the concept of the 50-50 split in romantic partnerships.
Which is wild because, the 50-50 split has been the gold standard for my entire adult life.
Oh, for most of us, yeah.
The whole idea is that everything in a modern relationship should be perfectly balanced, You split the rent, you split the dinner bill.
You take turns buying the groceries.
Exactly. You supposedly divide the emotional labor right down the middle, too.
Yeah.
I always picture the modern 50-50 relationship like a corporate joint venture.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it.
Right. It's like two CEOs sitting down with an Excel spreadsheet, tracking their exact contributions, and just making sure no one holds more than exactly 50% equity in the household.
Yeah, that corporate analogy perfectly captures the cultural ideal we've constructed over the last few decades. The 50-50 model was championed as the ultimate form of fairness and mutual respect.
Right, the great equalizer.
Precisely. It was designed to theoretically protect both partners from being exploited or, trapped by financial dependence.
So if you're listening to this on your commute or at the gym right now and you're thinking, well, this is just a fringe internet corner, why does this matter to me?
You have to remember those 1,400 saves.
Exactly. This ideology is actively bleeding into the expectations of people entering the dating pool right now. Which begs this massive question.
What's that?
If the 50-50 spreadsheet model was built to be the pinnacle of fairness, why is rejecting it striking such a chord? Why are thousands of women looking at this post and agreeing that equality in dating is something they need to escape?
It's a great question. And to understand the appeal of this rebellion, we really have to look at the psychological toll the 50-50 model has taken on this specific demographic.
Okay, so how are they experiencing it?
Well, for the audience engaging with this coaching material, the 50-50 model is no longer viewed as liberating. It is experienced as just utterly exhausting.
Exhausting. How so?
Because many women feel they achieve the career, the financial independence, the whole girl boss status.
Right, they checked all the boxes.
Yeah, but instead of finding a balanced partnership, they simply ended up carrying twice the load.
Oh, I see. So the math didn't actually work out to 50-50 in practice.
Precisely. In sociology, there's a well-documented phenomenon often called the second shift,
To second shift. Right.
because the spreadsheet easily tracks the tangible financial contributions,
Right.
who paid the rent, who bought the car,
Mhm.
but it rarely captures the invisible, emotional, and logistical labor required to actually maintain a life together.
Like, who remembers to schedule the dentist appointments?
Exactly. Who manages the social calendar? Who notices the paper towels are running low?
Yeah, the invisible stuff.
The perception driving this viral movement is that women are being expected to act as fully independent financial providers, while simultaneously continuing to manage all the traditional expectations of domestic and emotional upkeep.
So the spreadsheet is basically breaking them.
Yes, completely breaking them.
Wow, okay. That reframes her defiance completely, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like, the social repercussions she expects aren't just people disagreeing with her, it's the inevitable cultural backlash for daring to say out loud that the modern feminist dating ideal is actually a raw deal.
Right. She knows that abandoning the egalitarian narrative is heavily stigmatized.
She is bracing for critics to tell her she's setting women back 50 years. And she's basically telling her audience that the relief of dropping that exhausting 50-50 burden is worth whatever judgment comes their way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She is validating a very specific, very modern form of burnout. But of course, rejecting equality creates a massive structural gap.
Yeah, I mean, if no one is splitting the bill, someone still has to pay it. The relationship still requires resources and decisions and labor.
Right, which means we need a new framework. If the 50-50 corporate joint venture is out, how do you restructure the relationship?
And this is where the hashtags on the post shift dramatically. We move away from numbers and into these concepts of energy.
Yes, the energy tag.
She uses tags like polarity, feminine energy, masculine energy, goddess, and goddess energy. It's a whole new vocabulary.
It really is. And this brings us to the foundational principle of her proposed alternative. It's this concept of polarity.
Polarity. Okay, unpack that for us.
Within modern relationship coaching, polarity is the belief that sexual and romantic attraction fundamentally cannot exist in a state of sameness.
Wait, so you can't be alike?
Right. You cannot be identical, 50-50 equals, and maintain a spark. The philosophy insists that attraction requires opposite, distinct roles.
It's the classic magnet analogy.
Yes, exactly.
Like, if you take two positive ends of a magnet and push them together, they repel. You can't have two identical charges. To get them to stick together, you supposedly need a positive and a negative. You need distinct opposing forces.
That is the exact mechanical explanation this philosophy relies on. So the argument is that the 50-50 model creates two identical poles. Everyone is trying to be the provider, everyone is trying to be the emotional center.
And as a result, the romantic tension just flatlines.
Right. And the proposed solution to this flat line is to reestablish the opposing poles, a distinct masculine energy and a distinct feminine energy.
Okay, I hear that, but I really have to push back on this terminology for a second.
Go for it.
Because when you strip away the trendy words, it sounds an awful lot like we are just taking 1950s traditional gender roles. You know, the man goes to work, the woman stays home and looks pretty, and giving it a spiritual makeover.
I can totally see why you'd say that.
Yeah, it feels like traditionalism dressed up with healing crystals. Like Betty Crocker, but she's talking about her goddess energy.
That is such a vivid way to put it. And structurally, you're right, the underlying framework absolutely mimics deep traditionalism. The division of labor looks virtually identical to a mid-century household.
So what's the difference then? Why is this succeeding virally today?
The crucial difference is the locus of power. In the traditional 1950s model, the woman was financially dependent, legally vulnerable, and culturally instructed to be subservient to the head of the household. It was a top-down mandate.
Okay, so how does this modern coaching philosophy sell that exact same structure without it sounding like a surrender of power?
By framing it as an energetic optimization strategy rather than submission.
Energetic optimization strategy. That sounds like a tech buzzword.
It does, right. Tapping into feminine energy or goddess energy is pitched as the ultimate power move. The coach isn't telling women to be quiet and obedient.
What is she telling them?
She's instructing them to lean back, cultivate a magnetic, relaxed state, and use that powerful feminine energy to naturally draw in a man who possesses the masculine energy required to do all the heavy lifting.
So it is presented as a life hack.
Exactly. Why work yourself to the bone in a 50-50 split when your energy alone can inspire someone else to provide for you?
Wow. That completely shifts the traditional power dynamic. It takes the historical weakness of the traditional female role, which was passivity, and reframes it as a masterful, deliberate strategy.
Yes, it's not about being less than. It's about being so inherently valuable that you simply don't have to do the grueling labor.
It essentially turns patriarchy into a female-led, gamified strategy.
That is a perfect summary, and the goals of this strategy are highly specific.
Right, because this isn't just about abstract vibes or having a more relaxing weekend.
Not at all. The energy talk translates into very rigid, pragmatic endpoints, which we see in the next cluster of hashtags.
The really intense ones, provider men, hypergamy, hypergamy love, pedestal wife, and arguably the most jarring tag on the entire post-third wife energy.
Yeah, third wife energy is definitely the one that catches people off guard.
That one really tripped me up. But before we decode the third wife, we need to establish the baseline. We need to talk about the word hypergamy because it seems to be the engine driving this entire vehicle.
It really is. So hypergamy is originally a sociological and anthropological term for the practice of marrying or forming a relationship with a person of a higher sociological or economic class.
But the internet has kind of changed that definition, hasn't it?
Oh, it has been completely co-opted by modern internet culture. In the context of this viral post, and that provider men tag, hypergamy is a lifestyle philosophy that actively and unapologetically encourages women to seek out partners who can fully fund their existence.
It is the complete antithesis of the 50-50 spreadsheet.
Completely.
And to be clear to the listener, we aren't talking about a guy who occasionally treats you to a nice dinner. We're talking about a structural expectation of comprehensive financial provision. The man is the wallet, the woman is the goddess.
That is the intended dynamic. Which brings us to the archetype of third wife energy.
Right. Traditionally, when I hear third wife, it implies a very specific, almost derogatory stereotype.
What comes to mind for you?
It conjures the image of a much younger woman who comes along after a man has already built his wealth, gone through a messy divorce or two, and now just wants a trophy. How on earth does that become an aspirational dating philosophy?
It becomes aspirational through a profound rejection of the millennial ride or die narrative.
The ride or die narrative.
Right. In modern dating lore, the first wife is the woman who meets the man when he has nothing. She helps him build his career, she struggles alongside him, she supports him financially through law school, or works late nights helping him start a business.
She does the hard, unglamorous labor of potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then the second wife is often viewed as the transitional phase. But the third wife.
Yeah.
She enters the picture when the man is already fully established, highly wealthy, and emotionally stable. She skips the struggle entirely.
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating mental leap. It reminds me of the life cycle of a tech startup.
How so?
Well, the first wife is the founder in the garage, right? Eating ramen noodles, working 80-hour weeks, taking on all the massive risk. Adopting third wife energy is like saying, I refuse to work in the garage. I am only going to join this company on the day of the IPO when it goes public, the stock is high, and I can just walk into the corner office.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize the pragmatism at play here.
It's wild.
It is. Because for a long time, the dominant dating myth was all about building an empire together. You find a partner, you hustle together, you create a life from scratch.
But that's changing.
Yeah, and we have to look at the broader economic context driving this shift. For many millennials and Gen Z, the economic realities of housing costs, inflation, and stagnant wages make building an empire from scratch feel like an impossible myth.
Right, if two average incomes can barely afford a starter home anymore, the shared struggle doesn't feel romantic. It feels like a trap. The shared struggle isn't a badge of honor anymore. It's just economic inefficiency. Look, why build the empire when you can just walk into an empire that is already finished and take a seat on the throne?
Which ties perfectly into her tag pedestal wife.
Right. You don't want to be the co-CEO. You want to be worshipped on the pedestal.
It is a ruthless approach to romance, born out of a mix of burnout and economic anxiety. The philosophy looks at the ride or die woman and views her not as noble, but as foolish. It suggests that her struggle will ultimately be unrewarded.
But this raises a massive red flag for me.
What's that?
If you are openly advocating for a dating strategy where you skip the hard work, target a wealthy man, and demand to be put on a pedestal, how do you market that without sounding incredibly shallow?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. How do you convince a generation of modern, independent women to adopt a hypergamous lifestyle without it feeling like they're just signing up to be gold dashers?
Use a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse?
Yes. You borrow the language of a completely different, highly respected movement. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most brilliant cluster of tags on this post.
Ah, yes. These were the ones that really confused me at first. Tags like inner work, self-love, confidence, level up season, and life skills.
Exactly.
I stared at those tags for a long time. They don't look like they belong on a post advocating for wealthy provider men. They look like the tags on a mental health awareness post or like a yoga retreat.
And that is entirely the point. The integration of therapy speak into this philosophy is the mechanism that makes it socially acceptable to its audience.
So it changes the whole framing.
It changes the entire moral framework of the transaction. Seeking out a wealthy provider is no longer framed as financial opportunism or dependence. Through the lens of these hashtags, demanding a provider is framed as the ultimate manifestation of self-love and confidence.
It's the gamification of self-worth.
Exactly.
It really reminds me of a role-playing video game. Like in an RPG, you spend hours grinding. You know, you do your inner work to increase your character's stats. You build up your charisma, your intelligence, your emotional regulation.
Right, you're putting in the hours.
And once your stats are high enough, the game triggers your level up season. Unlocking that season gives you access to a higher tier of gameplay. So in this philosophy, doing your inner work unlocks your access to a higher tier provider man.
The gamification analogy is spot on, because the internal logic dictates that if you have done the rigorous psychological inner work, you must value yourself highly. Therefore, to accept a 50-50 relationship or to date a man who cannot fully provide for you would be a failure of self-love. It would mean you lack boundaries and don't know your worth.
Wow. So to demand hypergamy is to practice self-care.
That's the argument.
That is wild. It completely inoculates the creator against any criticism. Because if you try to critique her desire for a wealthy man by calling it transactional, she doesn't have to defend the transaction.
Not at all.
She can just flip it back on you and say, well, you're clearly triggered because you lack boundaries, you haven't done your inner work, and you don't love yourself enough to demand better.
Exactly. It makes the ideology bulletproof from the inside.
It creates a closed loop of logic. Any criticism is dismissed as a symptom of the critic's own unhealed trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to cement this worldview, she uses one final rhetorical tool. Nestled among those self-care tags, we see a very stark cultural comparison. She tags Western women and Eastern women.
Right. She tags Eastern women right next to self-care and level up season. It feels like she's kind of weaponizing cultural stereotypes to make Western dating look like a definitive failure.
She absolutely is. She is leaning heavily into Orientalism to validate her philosophy.
How so?
Well, in this coaching space, the Western woman is coded as the exhausted, hyper-independent, deeply stressed spreadsheet manager we discussed earlier.
The burned out 50-50 CEO.
Exactly. She is portrayed as having lost her polarity by becoming too masculine in her pursuit of equality, which results in failed relationships and burnout.
And the Eastern woman is set up as the foil to that.
Yes. The Eastern woman is romanticized as this ancient, idealized archetype. She is portrayed as someone who naturally understands polarity, who effortlessly embodies feminine energy, and who commands the provision and protection of masculine energy without ever having to fight for it.
Which obviously ignores the complex realities of global gender dynamics.
Completely ignores them. Instead, it uses a perceived, flattened cultural difference to prove her point that the West broke dating with equality and the East preserved the ancient secret of the pedestal wife.
It is just fascinating. It weaves together economic pragmatism, therapy language, gamification, and these romanticized cultural contrasts into a single cohesive worldview.
It's a very potent mix.
It really is.
Yeah.
When you pull back all the layers of this one video, still the picture is just staggering. We started with a blonde woman staring into a camera, refusing to care about social repercussions.
And underneath that defiance, we found a highly organized, rapidly spreading movement that is actively encouraging women to abandon the egalitarian 50-50 relationship.
It is a profound shift. We are watching the language of empowerment, boundaries, and self-care being systematically used to reconstruct traditional, hyperpolarized gender roles for a modern audience.
Yes. It argues that the spreadsheet is dead.
Dead and buried. It promotes goddess energy attracting masculine providers, advocates for skipping the struggle through third wife energy, and packages this entire transactional dynamic under the banner of knowing your worth.
It really makes you look at the dating world in a completely different light.
It does. It's not just about two people finding a match anymore. It's about navigating entirely different, fiercely guarded philosophies of existence.
It is a marketplace of ideologies, truly. And as we wrap up this analysis, there's lingering thought I want you, the listener, to ponder on your own.
Oh, I like where this is going.
We've seen how this philosophy treats modern dating like a highly structured economy.
Yeah.
You gamify your inner work, you level up your energy, all to secure the investment of a provider man. But if a relationship's foundation is built entirely on these transactional market principles, what happens when the market conditions inevitably change?
Oh, that's a great point.
What happens when financial fortunes shift? Or when the goddess energy wanes under the stress of real life? Or simply when you feel you've leveled up as high as you can possibly go? Does a relationship built on hypergamy survive a bear market? Or is the foundation only stable during a bull run?
That is a heavy, necessary question, and it really exposes the potential fragility hidden inside all that armor of confidence.
Absolutely.
Well, we started this deep dive looking at a single fleeting snapshot on a screen. But as always, when you take the time to look closely, the hashtag soup reveals an entire world operating just below the surface. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden architecture of modern internet culture. Keep asking questions, keep looking closer, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.